in its own defence and security. I feel that over many years we've not paid enough attention to what we European nations can and should do in our own defence, and this reinforces why it's important that we do that in defence and security. And defence and security these days, of course, includes energy and resilience and cyber, as well as the traditional defence and security. Europe has to step up into that space, and that's an argument I've been leading on and making for a number of months now with our European partners, and will continue to do so. Thank you, Chris. I've got Gary Gibbon from Channel 4. Gary.
Thank you, Prime Minister. You say that Donald Trump remains an ally, but a lot of people would look at his behaviours and say he's not remotely behaving like an ally. Is there anything he could do that would make you think he was no longer an ally? Or is it just unthinkable? Are we totally locked in? And just one other, if I may, some puzzlement that those forces, quite limited military personnel that went to Greenland, that he interpreted that as a hostile act. Do you have any sense that he might have been misinformed about that in entire expedition? Well, taking the second bit first, if I may, that is one of the things I discussed with President Trump yesterday in relation to those forces which were clearly there to assess and work on risk from the Russians. And so there's real clarity, I hope, about that. In relation to the relationship, we must never lose sight of the fact that on defence, security, intelligence and nuclear capability, we work very closely with our US allies, and it's in our national interest to continue to do so. That doesn't mean pretending we don't have differences, and I don't think anybody could suggest I'm pretending we don't have differences. I'm spelling out what those differences are, what our principles and values are, and how we approach them. But we do continue to work with the Americans. The situation in the Middle East is fragile. There is a ceasefire. We need to move to phase 2. We mustn't lose sight of that. In Ukraine, we've been striving for a just and lasting peace for a long time now. We're 4 years into that conflict. It is in our interest to work with others to bring about that just and lasting peace. The last thing we should do is to simply throw all that away and pretend that it doesn't matter anymore. It does matter. But we don't do that by pretending we haven't got differences. We do have differences, and I'm spelling them out here this morning. Thank you very much, Gary. I've got Kitty Donaldson from iNews.
Thank you, Prime Minister. The US Supreme Court is due to rule next week on whether the tariffs are legal for the President to use. Do you think it's worth just biding your time until next week? And secondly, I don't think you answered Robert's question, which was, do you think the King should go to the United States this year? I'm not going to comment on the Supreme Court ruling. I think it's due out reasonably soon. But I don't think it would be sensible to simply wait for the court. It's really important that we act now in response to the threat of tariffs, and that's why I spoke to President Trump yesterday and to numerous allies across Europe, many leaders during the course of yesterday afternoon, Secretary General of NATO, and will continue to do so today, because it's in all our interests to act swiftly in relation to this matter. Look, in relation to the King and other issues, as I said in my speech, I'm focused on the pragmatic response here, not the suggestion of others, and my focus is on what's in the national interest for our country, what is going to best protect workers, families, businesses, and I believe that's the approach that I've set out. Thank you, Kitty. I've got Craig Munro from the Metro.
Craig Munro from Metro. You spoke about the cost of living in your speech there. How can you be sure, how can you reassure people that the cost of living will improve in the UK when our economic picture is so reliant on an unreliable ally in an unstable global world?
By taking the approach that I've set out today. Some people appear to make the argument that what happens internationally is irrelevant to the cost of living issues that are faced across this country. I'm well aware that for all the volatility in the world, and we've seen plenty of that in the first few weeks of this year, the issue that is of central concern to families and communities across the country is the cost of living. wherever you go in the country and ask people what their number one concern is, they will say it's the cost of living, and therefore we have to address it. We address it in a number of ways. Firstly, by taking the measures to stabilise the economy so that inflation coming down, interest rates coming down, and protecting family budgets is crucial to that. By being active where markets fail, stepping in on energy bills, rail fares, prescription charges, etc. But also by working relentlessly on matters that are international, because the impact of what's happening internationally on what's happening domestically is obvious, it's real, it's probably more direct now than it's been at any time most of us can remember, and therefore it would be to a dereliction of duty on the cost of living not to be engaged on the international stage. Thank you very much, Craig. I've got Jason Groves from the Daily Mail. Jason.
Thanks, PM. Your Danish counterpart says NATO can't survive one member, the biggest, seizing the territory of another. Do you agree with her? And separately, are you willing to join the President's Board of Peace, and are you willing to pay for it?
Well, look, in relation to the Danish Prime Minister, as you would have anticipated, I spoke to her on Saturday night, I spoke to her again yesterday, and made absolutely clear our position on who decides the future of Greenland and the use of tariffs, and we're completely aligned on those issues. On the question of NATO, it is in all of our interest to make sure that NATO remains strong and stable. We had a very good NATO summit last year with more members than we've had before, with more unity than many people thought we would achieve. And NATO remains the single most effective and successful military alliance the world has ever known. And so it's in all of our interest to make sure that nothing is done to weaken NATO. On the question of the Board of Peace, look, we're supportive of the measures that are being taken across the Middle East, particularly the ceasefire. I do think we need to press on to phase 2. We've indicated our willingness to play our part, and we will. And on the Board of Peace, we're talking to allies about the terms of the Board of Peace. Thank you very much, Jason. I've got Lizzie Buchan from the Daily Mirror.
Thanks, Prime Minister. The head of the UN says that he believes that the US thinks its own power matters more than international law. Do you agree? And secondly, if I may, you've repeatedly promised to deliver a Hillsborough law, but the bill was pulled last night. Are you confident you can win back the support of families, and can you guarantee it becomes law before the end of this?
Yeah, thank you, Lizzie. Well, look, in relation to your first point, I've put my argument in my way, in my own words, and that's my approach, rather than sort of commentating on what others have said. On Hillsborough, as you know, I care hugely that we get this right, that we right the wrongs for very many families who've been let down, and ensure a better future for families in the future. In relation to the duty of candour, we've been clear that that matters. What we're now trying to do is just make sure we get the balance right when it comes to the application of any principle to the security and intelligence agencies. Obviously, I have to focus on the national interest, my primary duty as Prime Minister, which is to keep this country safe and secure. That is the duty I hold above all other duties, and I take it really seriously, which is why we're just taking time to make sure that we get that balance absolutely right. Thank you, Lizzie. George Parker from the FT. George.
Thank you, Prime Minister. You mentioned in your joint letter the risk of a downward spiral if this issue isn't resolved. I just wondered if you could explain what you meant by that. And linked to that, do you think it's regrettable that the EU is talking